Omijnana timirandasya jana jana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam gena tasmai shri gurave namaha. All goes to Srila Prabhupada, Savior of the entire world. So they asked me to speak about my limited association with Srila Prabhupada. Of course, there's Vani and Vapu, and the emphasis in the beginning of the movement was definitely Vani. But I did encounter Srila Prabhupada around maybe 4 or 5 times. So I'll try to paint the picture of the situation in America in the 60s and 70s. There was, everyone's heard about the Vietnam War? Okay. So what was going on was there was this Cold War between communists and the USSR and the Western world, the American capitalism and so on. They called it the free world. And so they wanted to fight communism. So in Vietnam, a war broke out, and so there are young people in America, you know, they're living a really nice, like Swargalok type lifestyle. They got swimming pools in the backyard, and they're sipping on Coke. And suddenly they get a little letter in the mail that says, "You've been inducted into the army. You have to go to Vietnam." So of course everyone watches the news in those days, and every day they showed all the bodies coming back to America. They're all like 20-year-olds, 21-year-old, 22-year-old boys. So that created a huge trauma amongst the young people and amongst the people in general in the States and in the Western world. And of course the Beatles and many of these groups were singing about peace and so on. And the Beatles were very prominent. So that's kind of the situation at that time in the Western world, that the youth were rebellious, very rebellious, and became very radical against the social situation. There was also the movement, civil rights movement for black people in America, who were, of course, they were slaves for hundreds of years, and they were deprived of certain rights and so on. So that was also going on. And many leaders were being killed and assassinated, like John F. Kennedy was killed. They said it was a conspiracy by the communists. And then his brother was killed. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was very violent times. And there was a lot of folk singers like Bob Dylan and so on who were singing protest songs. So this was the mood. And so there's this big youth movement going on. I probably need a glass of water. I'll try to soothe my throat. Huge youth movement going on, especially in North America. Even it spilled into, like where I was living was in Canada. And of course all the young people where I lived, which was on the West Coast, were sneaking up into Canada. So there was thousands of young people living on islands off the coast of Canada and the US, and they were called draft dodgers. They didn't want to go to war. And many of these people became devotees at the time. So in 1965, 66, Srila Prabhupada had just been delivered by Krishna into this huge mess, this social mess. And the young people, we were very radical. We didn't want to serve the status quo. We weren't interested in serving the establishment. We were experimenting with LSD, and we were listening to George Harrison of the Beatles and singing. He was singing about Krishna, and there were songs about peace and love and all that. So this was the situation that Prabhupada descended into. So people were actually doing a lot of searching, really searching for truth and social change. And that was the situation. So enter Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, many of the yogis and gurus were going from India, and they would go and target the wealthy people in upstate New York, not upstate New York, Manhattan area, kind of fancy part of New York. But Prabhupada went into the most, dangerous and impoverished part of New York, which was the Bowery. And in the Bowery, in that area, was called East Village. So what was happening was in each large city, Toronto, New York, San Francisco, all these cities, there'd be an enclave where young people were living. And, we were into like a lot of music, a lot of, LSD and psychotropic drugs and so on. And we created these villages. We call it the Village. So Prabhupada was living in the Bowery, which was near the East Village, in New York, and we had newspapers about radicalism, and so on and so forth. So Srila Prabhupada got this little place, 26 2nd Avenue, and had a sign, Bhagavad-Gita as it is, classes. And so young people who were interested, personally, I don't know why, but most of us were interested in the Vedic culture of some form. Like we were into yoga, we would attend presentations by different swamis. There was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he was offering transcendental meditation, and he would sell you a mantra. You'd have to pay for a secret mantra, $250. And the mantra my friend got, the mantra was Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. It's like, just look in the Bhagavatam. So this was going on, and a lot of people got ushered into these yogis who were basically exploiting the interest of the Westerners. They were looking for moksha, liberation, freedom from anxiety, freedom from stress, peace of mind, spiritual culture. That's what they're actually looking for. So there was a lot of people being cheated. Guru Maharaj, he said he was Krishna. He was another big name. And, he'd have huge followers, and he'd do rasa dance. They would rent big auditoriums, not auditoriums, football stadiums, and they'd fill up the stadium. Thousands of people would go. And then on stage with his premis, he called them premis, they're always beautiful young girls. And he would have Rasa Leela dance with them. What happened was eventually, Maya got him and he fell down with one of his premis, and his mother excommunicated him. So then she introduced his brother. He had a brother. And she said, no, he's Balaram. So Guru Maharaj was Krishna, and then he fell down. So then she sent the brother over, and she said, he's Lord Balaram. So all this nonsense and cheating was going on. All these swamis, most of the swamis were proponents of Advaitism philosophy, impersonalism, a lot of impersonalism. Karoli Baba was there. He had a following with Baba Ram Das. And it was all basically a Mayavad philosophy. So we were reading these books, and it was all impersonalism. But, many of us kept searching. So this was the kind of situation Srila Prabhupada was, entered into. And I mean, we were, not in a very high state of consciousness. We weren't like highly, sophisticated kids. We were just kids that were like wandering around. Sometimes we would hitchhike across the country, and just camp out on the sidewalks. There were so many kids in San Francisco just living on sidewalks and, finding food here and there. They call us street sadhus. We're like, here we are in a wealthy country, Canada, USA, lots of wealth, but we were rejecting it completely rejecting the status quo, the idea that, you get a good education and you go work in a factory or work in an organization, 9 to 5, little cubicle, and then you go home, pay the mortgage, pay for your car payments, pay the insurance bills, and go back again. So, we're just disgusted with the situation. And then, of course, with the war and everything, all the young people being killed, there was a lot of anger amongst young people, to a point where sometimes the young people would take over universities, like the University of Michigan, and they just took over the university and blocked everyone. And so the Michigan military came and started shooting young people. Kent State University, they shot a couple of young kids. So things were quite radical. So people started joining. Devotees would just probably say, you go out to the parks, go out to the streets, go out to Thompson Square Park, chant Hare Krishna. And if you look at those footage, you see so many young people. And we're all from middle class, most of us. So we're from the suburbs. We're not, born in poverty. But here we are, all rejecting everything. And if you look at these kids, you see they're kind of far out. We got wearing beads and long hair, and colored glasses. And our heroes were like Rolling Stones, rock bands, musical bands. Bob Dylan was friends with the devotees. He was a protest singer, folk singer, and he sang various songs about the problems in the society, but he had no solution, but he was an expert poet. He's a very good poet and lyricist. So that was the situation. And I would meet devotees at these big musical concerts. There were so many bands, and they would have huge concerts everywhere in America and Canada. And the devotees knew that, these are the kind of people who are going to become devotees. Actually, Srila Prabhupada said that our best customers are the hippies. Because we're rejecting everything. I mean, we're all hippies. I knew Radhanath Swami since 1973. We're all young kids traveling all over the place looking for the truth, and we were hippies, basically. All these people, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Vishnu John, they were friends. Vishnu John, he was living in a tree. There's these massive trees in California, and they have like little caves where the roots come down, and he was living in a tree. So that was the mood. And Srila Prabhupada would go to these places and he would preach. Sunrise Farm in California, near San Francisco, Prabhupada went there. And many of them became, Tamal Krishna Maharaj joined there. We're all a bunch of hippies. We're all living on these communes, trying to find out, peaceful life. And yoga groups would come in, and swamis would come in and teach us how to become God and all this, Just merge, just some meditation and merge, see the white light. So people started joining, and then, Srila Prabhupada was an extremely unique personality. I mean, when you saw him, he was so potent. There was so much potency. It was like a whole aura wherever he went. There's this spiritual aura. Like he was carrying like Goloka Vrindavan with him. He was definitely, just like Narottam Das Thakur, Lord Chaitanya entered into his body. If you read the Bible, like that, it's just Krishna or Lord Chaitanya enter into Srila Prabhupada's body. I mean, there's this huge aura. And while he was on the planet, there was this massive wave all over the planet, all over the globe. This kind of halo. And devotees felt very empowered. You know, if you hear about Sarabi Swami, Sarabi had met Srila Prabhupada, I guess, in Europe. And, you know, he said, I felt so empowered. Like you look at these buildings he built, you know. He's obviously an empowered, you know, he had the vision how to make beautiful, beautiful buildings. And Prabhupada would just empower him. I remember Prabhupada stopped in the middle of nowhere and on a train with Yamuna. He said, okay, just get off the train and go and preach. And then when he went to Delhi, he just told these devotees, Yamuna and Malati and Shyamasundar and so on, just get a room somewhere and start preaching. That was what Prabhupada was telling us. He said, take the Madanga, go to a city, and start chanting. Sit on the side. So many of us would go, I remember going by myself in Vancouver, which is just north of Seattle, Washington, a couple hours in Canada, and just sit on the sidewalk, start chanting, and people come up to you, and what's this about? So like that, we were going around like this. And Prabhupada said, all you need is a madanga and kartals. Just chant, you know. He just was completely convinced. And we send just one devotee, or a grihasta couple. Say, okay, you go to Tucson, start something. I remember we'd go places, and then we'd meet someone, they say, yeah, you can stay at my house. And we stay at their house, suddenly the house becomes a temple. That's how it was. And people were extremely receptive, young people. Every place we went to, I remember in Arizona, you'd meet people, they're vegetarians, they've read yoga books, they're interested in, they don't know it, but they're interested in Krishna consciousness or the Vedic culture. And they just opened their house to us. And, you know, what do you need? Yeah, and we'd have kirtan, we'd go out in the streets, and then we'd bring people back to the house at night. You'd have about 20 people in their house. And the devotees would stay back, cook some prasadam, halava, sabji, and chapatis, and rice. And people were amazed by the halava, usually. And they become devotees. So that was going on. So, Srila Prabhupada was very, like, he couldn't believe it. You know? He just struggled. He struggled by himself. And he, you know, Krishna guided him and empowered him. So he comes to this place called America, and all these young people were all like below 30. There wasn't hardly anyone over 30. I was 20. Some were, like I know, some were 15 years old. I'm just like, wow, this is far out. Let's do this. So you could see, like, he would come into the airport, I'd see him in Los Angeles, and thousands of devotees would just take over the entire airport. You know, these airports are not small. Like, if you go to the Los Angeles airport, it's like a big horseshoe, like this. So they have domestic on one side, they have international on one side. And so if you come in from somewhere and then you have to take a plane to India, you have to catch a shuttle bus. So then they drive you over to the international. And, you know, Chicago airport, LA airport. So Prabhupada would come into the airport and we'd, rent a big limousine, Rolls Royce. And we just take over the airport. Thousands of devotees. When Prabhupada was here, like, people were joining every day in America. Many people, daily. Like, we'd be surprised if someone didn't join in a temple within 7 days. We were surprised if someone didn't shave up. We'd be like, what's wrong? It was like that. Prabhupada inspired us. We became very, we became so inspired, like enthusiastic. It was like so much enthusiasm and youthful energy, and we just going out to the public and like just overwhelming them with enthusiasm. And they take the books, they buy the books. So that's how it happened. People didn't know anything about Krishna. Prabhupada comes, and everyone is attracted to Srila Prabhupada. Everyone, big scientists, big philosophers, big theologians, they would all come to see this person who did what no one else could do. Even the Christians and the Jewish leaders, the rabbis and, the priests and so on. They're like, wow, our kids don't like to go to the temple or the church. What's this person doing? And we went from totally degraded life, like complete sense gratification, no bars, no restrictions, to brahmacharis, 6 hours, sleep 6 hours, get up, Mangal Arti, go out and preach all day, come back, read Krishna book, go to do it day after day after day after day. They couldn't believe it. And we'd give up everything, we'd tell our parents the guys are in Maya. I remember, first time I met Prabhupada was in Portland, Oregon, which is on the west coast, north of California. And, this is 1972, June. And all the devotees from all over the west coast of North America, even further, we all driving vans, Sankirtan vans, they all converge on wherever Prabhupada was. So basically, in those days, we just rented small houses, bungalows. And then we just rip up the backyard, put in showers, make places for, parking all the vehicles, get the hoses out so we'd have cold showers in the morning. And Prabhupada was there, and there's 300 devotees in this little 2-bedroom bungalow that we had transformed into some kind of a temple. And so the Srila Prabhupada had come there in June, and we had been very enthusiastic in the beginning. 66, 67, 68, 69, 70 was mainly going out chanting. And we would chant, and then people would who are these guys? And they'd all crowd around us. And then we would go out into the crowd and do, back to Godheads and ask for a donation. And we were doing a lot of back to Godheads. But then in 72, Prabhupada kept saying, when he came to the airport in Portland, he was very, very serious. And, we were all greeting Prabhupada, and they had gotten a room at the airport where Prabhupada sat down, and they brought him a big plate of prasad and took some fruit. And he's very serious. He's saying, you have to do my big books. You're doing back to Godheads, but, I'm writing all these books. By that time, it was probably going into the second canto. I think he got into second canto part 1. I'm not sure he might have been writing or translating second canto part 2 by then. And he wanted his books distributed. The Back to Godheads, of course, he would say it's the backbone of our movement. And they were important. But the big books, he said, people will have them in their homes for generations. And he started emphasizing distributing big books. So we're thinking, how do we do that? We just go out and for 8 hours a day, we're just chant nonstop. Dance and chant. We were really young and, we were part of this hippie movement. So the hippies would invite us to their concerts. They would let us in, like Rolling Stones concerts. They'd call the temple. This was in Vancouver in 1972. The Rolling Stones they had an image of being bad boys. The Beatles were the good boys. So they created a band that was more like Bad Boys, Mick Jagger. And so the kids went to the concert, and outside the gate, they started throwing, rocks at the police and fighting with the police. And the police called our temple and said, we're having some trouble here. Because they really don't want to arrest the young people, because the young people are the future of their society. And they understood that the young people were very angry with, sending their brothers and mainly brothers and some sisters off to Vietnam or things like that. So there's a bit of tolerance with the police. So they called our little temple and they said, can you come down and chant? Because they knew that from seeing us in the streets, people would always call the police on us. And they would arrest us. Even when Prabhupada was in Portland that day that I was initiated, like there's a bunch of devotees in prison, in jail, for chanting in Portland. And of course the judge threw it out. But the Christians didn't like us. No one liked us, It's a Judeo-Christian culture. And so they would call the police and say, oh, these guys are down on the streets, bothering people and making noise, why don't you go arrest them? So the police would arrest them, and then when it came to court, the judge would throw it out. Unconstitutional, freedom of religious expression. So Prabhupada was sitting there, and he's, where is so-and-so? Oh, Prabhupada, they're in jail. Probably so annoyed. He said, rascals, why are they bothering these religious boys and girls? What is the problem? Why are they doing so? We just thought it was part of the gig, because as young hippie guys, we were always getting arrested. We saw the state as the enemy and the police representing the state. So we didn't really like the police at all, or any kind of law enforcement. We were pretty radical. I don't get arrested, big deal. I mean, Shyamsundar was arrested. He went to Seattle prison. Somehow he got let out after a month or two for selling drugs. Prabhupada said, what are you going to jail for? And Shyam said, well, Prabhupada, before I joined, I was selling drugs. I said, oh, yes, I used to sell drugs. I had a drug company in India. So that was the situation, and Prabhupada wasn't too happy. And so in Portland, there was probably 300 devotees there in this tiny house, and Prabhupada was there for a few days. It's the first time I met Prabhupada in person, and Pradyumna, he was a Sanskrit guy. He was from New Hampshire, New York, that area. And one of the, beginning, there was a beginning group, then people started joining more. From 1970, people started joining more, and it just snowballed and mushroomed. So by 1976, the movement was just booming. And Prabhupada was just, big smile. He couldn't believe it. It was like huge amount of a wave of Krishna consciousness. And of course, the more people were joining, the more success we had, the more retaliation there was. And actually, Bhaktisiddhanta, he writes about this in the Sajjanatoshani. He says Krishna consciousness cannot be spread just by positive response, but there's also it's more effective by negative responses. He writes a whole article like that. the negativity, just like Krishna, he said Krishna is more famous as the killer of cunts than he is the son of Mother Yashoda. So this negative publicity was great, because what happened was young people would be watching the news or watching newspapers, oh, Hare Krishnas are bad. And they were rebellious to the establishment. Oh, I'm going to check this out. They say it's bad, and they didn't believe anything. We didn't believe anything the media said, so they go to the temple and become devotees. And Prabhupada said, the fact that they're giving us bad publicity is because of the great value of Krishna consciousness, and that they're feeling the weight of our preaching. He said they're becoming alarmed because it's ruled by demons. The whole society is ruled by a demoniac class of men. So he wasn't bothered about good publicity, bad publicity. In fact, in Chicago, the first Rath Yatra, there were 2 newspaper articles. And of course, in Chicago, that's where Vivekananda had given his lecture years before. And he was talking, it's all one, religions are all the same. I mean, he wasn't really preaching Bhagavad-Gita, but he became, he's popular, Vivekananda, So when Prabhupada had to give a talk at the end of the Rath Yatra, first thing he said was, Janmadi Yasya Yataha. And he quoted the Vedanta Sutra and said that the Supreme Absolute Truth is a person. So these 2 newspaper articles came the next day after the Rath Yatra in Chicago. And one was favorable. And the guy was, oh yeah, these are young people, they're very idealistic. And he only mentioned Hare Krishna mantra like 3 or 4 times. The other article that came out was very negative. And the guy was like, these Hare Krishnas, they're brainwashed. These Hare Krishnas, they harass people in the public, These Hare Krishnas, they sleep on the floor. And he kept blasting, Hare Krishnas are bad, Hare Krishnas this. And it was like 50 Hare Krishna chants. Prabhupada looked at both articles. He said, this one's not bad, but this one is very good. He said, millions of people will be chanting Hare Krishna today. So that's how he saw things. He didn't bother him at all. He wasn't worried about voix populi. The Hare Krishna Maha mantra was so powerful that it was just purifying the whole society, whether people like it or not. The Hare Krishna Maha mantra coming down from all the great personalities, all our predecessors, all these great personalities who were Lord Chaitanya's assistants, are all manjaris. Coming from the spiritual world, they're like Rupa Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Narottam Das Thakur, Vishwanath Cha. These are great personalities who came directly from the spiritual world. So this mantra is very powerful. And then there's Prabhupada. He's on the same level, and he's very empowered. And so this the globe was basically covered by this halo of potency as Prabhupada walked on the planet. You can imagine the most hostile audience is the people who are full of, material opulence, Bhogaishvarya, like the demons, Hiranyakashipu, he was very powerful. And he had he had wealth. That was his thing, wealth and sense gratification. So that's what America is all about. It's all about money and sense gratification. And they don't want anyone to, they're demoniac. One time in LA, I was sitting there and one Mataji put up her hand. Prabhupada, why are so many girls taking birth in the movement? Prabhupada said, to attract the demoniac class of men. He says they're all demons. They will be attracted by our daughters, like that. So they're demons. And very demoniac. So he was preaching to the most hostile audience on the planet, you know. And yeah, there will be a challenge. There was a challenge. And Prabhupada said, "That's good. We're up for the fight." He was a warrior. One time in the elevator, he was coming down. He had a slight heart attack in New York. And then they decided that he should go to California and recuperate. So Ramaswar was in the elevator with him. Everyone knows Ramaswar? He was running the BBT, the publishing. He had to, you know, make sure the books were all properly edited, all the right photos. Prabhupada was very specific about the artist, the devotee artists. Actually, that devotion comes through in the art. And his whole technique was, his whole strategy was, these pictures will sell the books. And, you know, they went to Macmillan Publishing House, and Macmillan was interested in a Bhagavad-Gita. They wanted to publish a Bhagavad-Gita. These books were becoming popular in America, Bhagavad-Gita, Tibetan Book of the Dead, and all these esoteric Oriental philosophies are becoming quite popular in the West. So the Macmillan Company, they got Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, and they were very impressed. And Prabhupada said, you can't change anything. He said, like the art may not be very, very sophisticated, like Michelangelo or, you know, Da Vinci or these great artists of Europe, but he said they're full of bhakti. So if you look, you'll see some of the pictures in Krishna book, pretty simple, pretty rudimentary. And Jadharani, she was one of the first artists, and she got better and better and better, and now she's a wonderful artist. But Prabhupada's one time, Ramaswara came into the room in Los Angeles, and he said, Prabhupada, I think, you know, like we can cut the cost of the publishing if we make the Krishna book smaller. And, you know, like we should make it a little smaller. It's quite large. Prabhupada said, you Americans, you always want to change everything. and then he said, you know, we have better paintings, like the painting of Balaram killing Pralambasura. And there's a picture of Krishna, the cowherd boys. And so these pictures, the one killing Keshi. So Ramaswara said, we have better artists now, the artists are better, so we should change these. Prabhupada was furious. He got so angry, his lips were shaking. He said, get out! He kicked Ramaswara out of the room. He said, get out, don't change anything. Then they changed Ishopanishad, which was Prabhupada had targeted the Ishopanishad for the impersonalism. You know, that book was directed completely towards those like myself and many who were reading all the impersonalist stuff over there in the West. And that book was directed and strategized by Prabhupada to read it. So he didn't want Krishna, he wanted Super Soul on the cover. And Ramaswara, he came, he said, you know, Prabhupada, you know, like Lord Vishnu, we're not Vishnu Bhaktas, we're Krishna Bhaktas. And they changed the cover. Prabhupada was so angry. He said, how dare you change anything, not even a word without talking to me. I'm the author. Everything Prabhupada did, he had a deep thought about. And we think, oh yeah, this book is this size, these pictures, you know, but Prabhupada, every detail was for a purpose, very specific purpose. And he would be very angry if his, you know, his publishers and his aides and those who were involved with the printing and publishing, like Ramaswara, would try to change something. He'd be so angry. I remember he was so angry with Ramaswara when he wanted to change the paintings. Subal was Prabhupada's servant at the time, and he came up the stairs in LA. You go up the stairs from the temple room, there's Prabhupada's room upstairs. his house like this, a couple of rooms, and you see him in some YouTube videos, and he's walking back and forth chanting Hare Krishna. That's in Los Angeles. Then he has a garden like this in the back, a nice garden where he would meet scientists and professors and theologians. So Subal came up and he heard the screaming, and Subal's a bit of a, he's not really a Kshatriya, he might be the opposite of he heard the screaming, and probably just yelling at Ramaswar, and he opened the door and he was shaking. And so he just closed the door and he just kind of scurried away, although he was Prabhupada's servant, He was supposed to be in the room there. So that was the way it was. Sometimes, Srila Prabhupada, one time when I was being initiated in Portland, so Pradyumna would look in the Sanskrit dictionary or in other books, Sanskrit books, and find names. He'd find names for the devotees. So my Karmi name could be a girl or a boy name. It's Chris. Could be Christine or Christopher. So Pradyumna, without checking, he gave me a girl's name. And so we're all lined up to get initiated. We're kids. I was 20, just becoming 21. And we're kids. Some of us were like 16. Like, what do you know at that age? You don't know anything. You just come out of the womb, basically, out of the cradle. Although we thought we knew lots, but we really didn't know anything. We had no idea about life. Anyway, Pradyumna would give the name to Prabhupada and be sitting there, Yes, what are the 4 principles? And how many rounds? Yes, at least 16. On your beads, he would say like that. And and sometimes, like one guy that joined, he was an old hippie, so he had a hard time with smoking. And his name was Prabhupada Das. And so I was watching the initiation when he came up. And how would Prabhupada know that he was struggling with smoking cigarettes? He was an older person. He was probably in his 50s, and we were all 20. Prabhupada looked at him, what are the 4 principles? And then he said, and no smoking. So when you're with Prabhupada, he's looking right at you. He knows exactly what you did, where you came from. It's like a laser beam going right into your soul. And when he looks at you, he knows exactly where you're at. He knows what you're thinking, what your character's like, what your personality is like. He knew everything. Like you can ask Srila Kirti. Prabhupada was very gentle with Srila Kirti, but with Tamal Krishna or Yamuna, he was really heavy because they could take it. When they were building this property, Yamuna was here with Guru Das, her husband, and the devotee, we didn't know anything. I wasn't here, but we were sending Lakshmi from book distribution. They were preaching to us, every dollar you collect is 1 stone in Vrindavan, or 1 stone in Mayapur. That was the inspiration. So they're like going out, hardcore. Sometimes till Mangalarti. We go out, distribute books till Mangalarti, especially around Christmas. Nothing shuts down around Christmas, so we go nightclubs till 3:30 in the morning, or stop people at the lights, traffic lights, cars are at the lights, and you go, hey, check this out, we're pretty fired up. So,
Your initiation?
Yeah, thank you. So, I got off track, yeah. So, Pradyumna, he gives Prabhupada my name. Prabhupada looks at it. And, we're all spaced out. Young people just join the movement. There's a lot of space out. We'd be like eating so much halava. Totally out of control. And I looked and he said to Pradyumna sitting there, he goes, "What is this nonsense?" And it was just like a earthquake when Prabhupada like released this power, you know. It was like and Pradyumna was like, it's like a hurricane hit him, you know. It's like Sika's blowing or something. It was like so powerful, and he's like, "What is this?" And he said it under his breath. You know, there's a whole room full of new devotees. Prabhupada. He said, "Forget it, I'll pick his name." He didn't say light up, he said, "I will pick his name." He was just totally annoyed. You know, there's so much space outs going on. So he thought about it, and he looked at me and he goes, "Your name will be Kripa Nidhi." It means the ocean of mercy. Because, I don't know, I was a book distributor. I love giving people books. So he chose my name, and everyone, "Yeah, Haribo." So he chose my name, and then a year or two later, I was in Los Angeles, and you know, he looks at different devotees, and he goes, and he tells them something. So he looked at me and he said, "You're a little too." He said, "You should like take this slowly." He said, "This is a gradual process." I was infamous for being a little fanatic. Sometimes we go in cold parts of Canada or cold parts of America, like -40. And to keep devotees awake when we're chanting, we'd rent a motel room or something. I would open all the windows and doors. And then we would do shopping malls. So I would drop them off at 10 in the morning and say, "Okay." You know, it's I remember -25, -30. I'd say, "There you go, here's your books." And I'd drop them off and say, "Pick you up at 9 p.m. So I got a reputation to be a little too intense, a little too heavy. So Prabhupada looked at me in LA. It was just like a couple of years later, maybe 1 year later after I'd become initiated. He says, just relax. It's a gradual process. He said, "Just relax, you know. Don't be too, in other words, don't be too overzealous." Anyway, so yeah, definitely with Srila Prabhupada's presence, there was this just a different level of determination and conviction and energy, and Prabhupada would say, "Yes, we can push back Kali Yuga." Tripurari asked him, "Prabhupada, if we really try hard, can we push back Kali Yuga?" Prabhupada said, "Yes, this is the spirit. We can push back Kali Yuga." Push it back all the way, back to Dwapara Yuga. Like that. So he would always encourage us. We had a newsletter, a weekly newsletter. It's called the North American Newsletter. So it was huge competition. The Prabhupada was very, very competitive. He was encouraging different temples to compete. So Jayatirtha, he was in charge of LA, GBC. And then on the east side was New Vrindavan. They had a huge Sankirtan group, and that was Kirtanananda. So there was competition between New York, LA, New Vrindavan, and then there was a Radha Damodar party. Radha Damodar party was started by Vishnu Jan Maharaj and Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And Vishnu Jan Maharaj was very, very dear to Srila Prabhupada because he's a very sweet devotee. He was like a big gulab-jamun. Wherever you squeezed, you got nectar. And he'd come around to all the temples and encourage us, you know. And he was totally into just chanting. And Tamal Krishna and him were partners. They started the Radha Damodar parties where we bought these buses. And then we'd go to campuses. So Vishnu Jan would go on a campus. And we'd bring all the new brahmacharis. And they'd sit on the campus, and he'd get different instruments from India, like exaraj, sitars, all the far-looking instruments. And they just have these kirtans and so many. That was like the 70s, beginning the 70s till all the way through Srila Prabhupada's time. And so many young college students, boys, were joining, so many, because Vishnu John was like a glubjaman. He was just attractive. I remember Prabhupada wrote him a letter, and I've never seen this kind of context or this kind of language used since then. And he wrote Vishnu John. He said, "My dear son, Vishnu John." He addressed him as "my dear son." Usually it would be "my dear boys and girls of America, I'm very grateful for what you've done." Like 1 month, the first month, 1972, we did a huge marathon at Christmas. We discovered Christmas. And we did 3 million pieces of literature in North America in 1 month, 3 to 4 million. And Prabhupada wrote, "My dear boys and girls, my dear American boys and girls, I'm so delighted by your huge effort. This is like miraculous. No one has ever heard of so many millions of religious books being distributed like this in 1 month." And he said, "I'm so grateful to you boys and girls." But with Vishnu John Maharaj, my dear son, Vishnu John, he said, "When I listen to your kirtans, I get transported into the spiritual world." He actually wrote him a letter like this. I don't know if you've read it. So I get transported into Goloka Vrindavan. So he had a real intimate attraction, feeling for Vishnu John Maharaj, who would, basically he would go out and just chant for hours and hours in the streets, and people were so attracted to him. And then he started the Radha Damodar with Tamal. So Tamal was like the hammer, and Vishnu John was like the cheesecake. And it worked, It worked out. And so many were joining in those days. So that was the Hare Krishna explosion. So there is many professors, especially many theologians. There was Harvey Cox from Harvard University. He was a theologian, Christian. And then there was Dr. Stilson Judah. He was from UCLA, Berkeley. And, they teach religion. And students take this course, and they get a credit, and that's it. They don't start practicing Christianity or any kind of religious practice. But here they see all these young people actually living the Bhagavad-Gita. So they were very amazed by this. And Stilson Judah, he started interviewing all the young people. He was famous scholar. I mean, Harvey Cox was also from Harvard. He really loved Srila Prabhupada. He actually said, "If I was a young kid, I would have probably taken initiation." Now, he's not just in an ordinary position. Harvey Cox was the professor who would give advice to the President of America, of the USA. They would always inquire, "Oh, what about this guru coming from India?" They were watching all the different, what they call at the time, new religions. So Hare Krishna was part of, in that category, new religions. It was, like I say, Maharishi Yogi. It was mainly Indian Swamis, and some Buddhists, but mainly Indian Swamis, and most of them were cheating people. Rajneesh, Osho, all cheating people and making lots and lots of money off of people's, interest in moksha. Another one was Sai Baba, all cheaters. And Prabhupada was very these fellows are coming from bogus guys. He says, how can Krishna consciousness spread? They're giving such a bad name, So Harvey Cox was the guy who would advise the President of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, what these groups are like. Are they cults? Are they dangerous? Because, parents were very worried. Parents were really worried, and there was a lot of publicity and media, anti-cult media going on, all in the Western countries at that time. And Harvey Cox gave Prabhupada, 100%. He said, this is a real saint. He's a great person. And so, he gave full, 5-star reference, great reference. And all the professors in the universities were giving Srila Prabhupada great references, great eulogy, great recommendations, in spite of the bad media. So Stilson Judah really loved Srila Prabhupada, and every time Prabhupada came, he would come always to LA when he was traveling. So he'd do the circuit. He'd go around the world so many times. So he'd come to New York, then he'd go to Chicago, then he'd go to Toronto, then he would go down to usually Los Angeles and San Francisco. That was his North American tour. Then he would go down to Mexico City, and I think he went to Venezuela. And then he'd go over to, he'd go over to Africa, Kenya. He was in Kenya. And of course, his plan was to establish the movement very strongly in India. So of course, he brought his dancing white elephants to Mumbai and Gujarat, and we know the history. So Stilson Judah was always ready. He'd come to Los Angeles and probably go for morning walks every morning on the beach there. And, we'd be invited as brahmacharis or whoever, Mataji as well. We'd, go out. Of course, sometimes I was like, I'm too fallen, I shouldn't go. But I went once or twice. Some of us were just like, okay, we should do books, Prabhupada said, Vani, Papu is less. And Stilson Judah and these professors, especially Stilson Judah, would come and ask Prabhupada questions. And he realized, he'd say, Prabhupada, the problem is that no one's following Christianity. He's a Christian theologian, a big one. He said, no one's really following. They don't know how to follow. He would admit it. And later on, just in the last 20 years, this lady, who's a little girl at the time, her parents were very close friends with the Stilson Judah's family in San Francisco area, Bay Area. And so as a little girl, she would always notice, like when she went to the home of Stilson Judah and played with his kids, that this was like the nicest man she ever met. And what she told us, she's now an adult and she's buying a Bhagavad-Gita in the street from a brahmachari in Los Angeles. And she said, I wasn't going to buy this Gita because all my friends said you guys are a cult. But she says, I noticed Stilson Judah's name on the reference. And I'm a personal friend of the family. And she said, in his basement, he had an altar. And on the altar, he had Jesus and he had Prabhupada. And he had pictures of Krishna. So he had become so impressed when, if you're a little bit receptive and you're a little bit honest and you associate with this great Maha Bhagavad, this powerhouse of devotional service, you can't help but become totally overwhelmed by affection for him. And Stilson Judah was quietly, because he was a Christian theologian teaching Christianity at a big university, in his basement he had this altar with a picture of Prabhupada and of course Jesus and so on. He understood it was the same message. So that's the kind of impact that Srila Prabhupada had on the intellectuals in many universities, Europe, Paris, Frankfurt, London, England, and America, Canada, Australia. They were really impressed by his books. His books are just incredible, amazing how most prolific author of Vedic knowledge, thousands of purports in such a short period. I mean, by the time the movement started taking off, it was 1971, 72, and it really started getting off the ground. And then 77, we were just couldn't believe Prabhupada was leaving us because he was so youthful. he was always like super energetic, super jolly, super ecstatic, and at the same time very serious. It was like a powerhouse, you know. He said, "Oh no, Prabhupada's gonna live till 110, you know." You know, he's never gonna. And then, you know, when he got really sick, we were like, "Whoa!" And so I was here. I came a few days before Prabhupada left. And, you know, we were like, yeah, he's going to make it. He's going to make it. He's going to revive, you know. But he had become very, very emaciated. He wasn't eating for months. And the day that Prabhupada left the planet, I woke up at 2:30. I was sleeping in the Gurukula. That's where we all stayed, the brahmacharis. And some reason I woke up at 2:30, and then I came down, so I was chanting for him, my japa. And Jayadvaita and Bhardraj and Bhakti Maharaj, they were in there taking care of Prabhupada. And they had this little dropper, and they were giving him some maybe orange juice and so on. And so I was chanting, and then they sat Prabhupada up. Actually, Prabhupada was flailing his arms, just like some ecstatic emotions. And anyway, they sat him up because he was trying to say something. And when they sat him up, I saw that Prabhupada's body was just totally emaciated. It was like shocking. I almost like fainted. I said, how is he maintaining it? It was like, you know, nothing there, and he was maintaining his body, like Bhishmadev, basically. And it was like really hit me in the face that, you know, it's, I don't think there's much of a, you know, it just shocked me. Because until then, no one wanted to accept. None of us. Brahmananda was there. You know, we were like, yeah, Prabhupada. You know, Hamsaduta was there. Yashomati Nandan was there. Many devotees were there from around the world, Vishaka and Yadubar. And we're like, yeah, you know, Krishna's not going to take him. We got lots more to do. And then at 1 o'clock, we were taking prasad over the Gurukula downstairs, and the Kaviraj said Prabhupada will leave around 7. In fact, he gave the exact time, whatever it was, 10 past 7. So we all got up, and then we came into the room here, and we just chanted for Prabhupada until 7, 10 past 7. And Prabhupada was very, very quiet. And right at the end, when he was leaving, he said, Hare Krishna. And he didn't finish. And back home, back to Lord Krishna. And it was, for us, it was very emotional. It was also, I felt personally very ominous, like very, like, feeling like, what's going to happen now? Chaos, right? Just like Gaudiya Math, when Bhaktisiddhanta left. And Bhaktisiddhanta told Srila Prabhupada at Radhakund, he said, there's fire in these walls, you know. He said, if you ever get money, just print books. And he said, you know, and he told Prabhupada at a young age that you should go outside of India, right, and to the to the English-speaking countries and foreign countries. So, and then he warned Prabhupada at Radhakund, and he said, there's fire in these walls, you know, you should, if you ever get money, print books. That was his instruction. Not build temples. Of course, Prabhupada had a strategy that 50% went for building temples. So whatever profit we made from books, if it was $100, $50 would go towards building up the temples in Mayapur, Vrindavan, Mumbai, and temples. He would loan money to the different temples in the West, and then you'd have to pay back. Like the temple in Toronto, Canada, is like a huge church made of stone, and that was the most expensive property that we ever bought at that time. It was $500,000. And we were just this, embryonic movement. And this devotee, he's from Toronto, but he was running Chicago as well. His name is Uttama Shloka. And Prabhupada came to Toronto, and Prabhupada, there's just this big church for sale. And Prabhupada said, well, where is he? He says, yes, right downtown, Prabhupada. Downtown, this big city, right like close to downtown. Beautiful building. Oh, yeah. He says, let's take a look. So they drove by it, it's like on one of the main roads, like in this super expensive city. And right downtown. How much is it? Prabhupada, it's a little expensive. How much? $500,000. Oh. Too much anxiety. We don't want anxiety for Krishna. We don't want anxiety. He said, no, it's too much. So then Prabhupada went somewhere, and then he phoned Uttama. He said, so is the building still for sale? I said, yes, Prabhupada, but you said, don't worry about it, don't bother. Too much anxiety. You don't want to buy anxiety. So after a few months, Prabhupada come back, or a year maybe, and they went and toured the building. And actually the Christians, they gave Prabhupada a book about, Christianity. And so Prabhupada was sitting there, and he was speaking to Uttama, and actually first he read this thing in the car, and he said, oh, they don't know anything about God. They're totally confused. He said, well, Uttama, what do you think? It's a beautiful building, blah, blah, blah. Can we buy it? Uttama, yeah, I can arrange a deposit, and we can take a loan from the BBT, and then we can pay it off, And but Prabhupada, you said, don't buy anxiety. Prabhupada's thinking, and suddenly he banged his fist on the desk like this, and he goes, no, we must take anxiety for Krishna. We must take anxiety for Krishna. So they bought the property. And today it's probably worth, $70 million. Yeah. So one time Prabhupada I was saying this story, he had another heart attack, and he was in the New York hospital, and he was coming down the elevator, Ramaswar and Balabaja, I think it was there. Anyway, another devotee with Ramaswar, and they were saying, Prabhupada, you have to take it easy, You have to go and recuperate, and go to a nice place like California where the weather's nice, And they're saying, Prabhupada, don't worry about preaching right now. Prabhupada looked at them, at Ramaswar, and he said, never take away my right to struggle for Krishna. And he just was very adamant, very emphatic about it. And that was Prabhupada. He was a warrior too, fighter, every moment. Even when he was really sick, they would take him around in India, and he would just be very sick, but as soon as he started preaching, all this powerful energy. So I was there and chanting for Prabhupada on his last day, and then when Prabhupada left, my GBC was Jagadish, and devotees were pretty exhausted, we'd been up, and it was pretty, traumatic, and he was having a hard time finding young men to dig Prabhupada's samadhi. So there was no big machinery then here in India or here in Vrindavan. So Jagadish was assigned the task of getting this samadhi dug. It was Raman Reti, so it was sandy soil over here. And so no one was coming forward, so I put my hand up. I said, I'll do it. So myself and one of my godbrothers, his name is Abhinanda. He's from Seattle, Washington. That's where they make Boeing planes. His dad worked for Boeing. So he said, yeah, I'll do it too. We were like young brahmacharis, 25 years old, 26 at the time. And we spent the night, and we dug Prabhupada's samadhi. I can't remember if we had any other help, but I remember the devotees were looking for me. Where's Kripa Nidhi? Because I was gone from 7 p.m. I was gone, and we were digging, and he said, this devotee, my godbrother, he had come with me from Vancouver, Canada, and he was looking, what happened to him? Where is he? Because I wasn't in my room all night. Then he looked down, he saw my head at the bottom of the pit. Oh, okay. So that was my last service to Srila Prabhupada. I volunteered to dig Prabhupada's samadhi. And then Narayan Maharaj came and he did all the rituals and everything, and he spoke very nicely about Prabhupada, actually. He quoted that verse, Krishna Shakti Vinanahe Tara Pravartani. He said, no one can spread Krishna consciousness unless he's completely empowered by the Lord. And he gave Prabhupada full honors that, Prabhupada had become so empowered, like Dhruva Maharaj or Prahlad Maharaj or any of these great personalities, Narada Muni. He becomes so empowered to convince these crazy people in America to become Vaishnavas. It's quite a miracle. And so he gave a wonderful lecture glorifying Srila Prabhupada. And then we took, first in the morning at 6, we took Prabhupada to all the major temples, Prabhupada's body, the Radha Damodar and so on. Bhavananda was there, Tamal Krishna was there, Hamsaduta was there, Brahmananda was there, like that. So we did a kirtan. In those days, Vrindavan was just a village. If you wanted to go to Loy Bazaar, you just take a bicycle rickshaw. You're there in 5 minutes. None of this. There was nothing. There was a couple of lassi shops across the street. So we took Prabhupada around and big kirtan, then came back and did the ceremony. And, it was very emotional, very heavy time. A lot of concern. And the discussion was, I think the day before, or the same day or the day after, the discussion was, I think it was just right after, was, did Prabhupada appoint gurus? No, Prabhupada's the guru. So there's 2 teams already, 2 camps. One was, Prabhupada's the only guru. The other one was, no, Prabhupada said that his disciples should take disciples. The etiquette is you wait till the spiritual master leaves the planet, then your disciples can take disciples. So it was just right away there was some controversy and discussion, but hey, the movement's expanding. In the light of Bhagavad, Prabhupada writes in one place that when the great Acharya leaves, and chaos ensues. So we have to expect there were some problems. Just like Gaudiya Math, the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur left and things went awry, sideways, So ISKCON struggled, but we're still going strongly by Lord Chaitanya's mercy and still trying to please Srila Prabhupada. And that's all. Just try to please the great Acharya, and everything will be fine. And the main thing he always said, in my presence, always, every single lecture, at the end of Bhagavatam class, it was distribute books, distribute books, distribute books. He always emphasized that over anything else. Of course, everything else are important. Deity worship was introduced by Sanatana Goswami, very important, purifying ourselves. But his emphasis was that the preaching and the main way of preaching was the distribution of his. He told, he said, if they touch my books, I was there, he said, if they even touch my books, if they don't read them, if they just touch them, their lives can become perfect. They get purified. Because he said, Krishna's writing. Krishna's dictating to me and I'm writing. It's like Arjuna. Krishna's empowering Arjuna. As soon as the war was over, Arjuna's chariot fell apart. He couldn't even protect the gopis, wasn't it? Pastime like that. So like that, Krishna was entered Prabhupada's body, empowered him, and also Krishna was dictating. It's an amazing feat of, writing all these Bhagavatams and Chaitanya Charitamritas with all the purpose. Is incredible. It's beyond imagination. Who else could do that? So Prabhupada would say, Krishna wrote these books. That's why I read them. So when they're touching these books, Prabhupada once told us, we were traveling way far from the temple in the early days, and there was, but Prabhupada, they're buying bread in the shop, and they're buying cheese in the shop, and there's no deities, so they're eating boga, they're eating sin, because there's no deities where we were traveling. I said, my books are deities. He said, let them offer to my books and keep preaching. And then Harikesh, he always wanted to stay with Prabhupada. Prabhupada, I don't want to leave him. Prabhupada's like, go and preach in Russia, go and preaching, in the USSR, right? No, Prabhupada, I just want to be with you all the time. and Prabhupada just was so strong on him. And he said, but Prabhupada, there's nothing to eat in Russia. They only have meat there. I said, I don't care, eat meat, but preach. So that was how strong he was about the preaching. Madhyamadikari. You want us to be Madhyamadikaris and deliver the world. His vision is that this is their only hope. This is the only hope for the world. There's no other hope. We have to be convinced. That you're not convinced, you should be convinced. Yeah. Hare Krishna, 6:30. So. Oh, good. Prabhupada, is there any questions or comments or for a couple minutes? Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhuji, most of the times we are engaged in so many services, and many times we just consider ourselves only, our personal problems and other issues. We don't consider preaching, so we don't give that much of importance to preaching.
When you say we, who do you mean, you or?
I'm talking about myself.
Yeah, I've been distributing Prabhupada's books for 50 years. And still, I go out by myself in the West. There's not so many devotees. We live in a farm area called Sharanagati, which is in Canada. And even sometimes, my mind gives me trouble. Oh, you don't have to go out today. You've been doing it for so long, blah, blah, blah. You have to overcome your mind and just put your feet on that sidewalk. Because no one's going to invite you to their, parliament buildings and say, come, tell us about Bhagavad-Gita. Prabhupada said, the mouse never invites the lion, come eat me. So similarly, there's demoniac civilization. They don't want to hear about Krishna. You have to push them, take the mercy. So we have to push our minds. We have to have a strong sadhana bhakti program, and then we have to put ourselves out there to interact with the public. And even because you're a Hindu, it doesn't mean that you're not committing sinful activities. They don't know. They're eating chicken pakoras, and they maybe don't offer it, or maybe they offer it to Lord Shiva. They don't know the principles of Dharma. Even I'm a pious Hindu, yeah, but I like my fish or my chicken pakora or whatever. So they have to be taught also. They're also, in fact, even if you're vegetarian and you're not offering your food to Krishna, there's sinful reaction. So everywhere we go, we have to tell them about Krishna. Yaradika Tarikaha Krishna Upadesh, and we have to force ourselves. Just put ourselves in, get out of our comfort zone. This is nice and comfy now. In the old days, the first devotees that came to India, they were living under huts in Mumbai. They're from America, and they're living like austere, trying to build Prabhupada's movement. I remember seeing Gaur Govinda. He was in the middle of a jungle in Bhubaneswar when I saw him in 1970. I think I saw him in 77. He's by himself in the jungle with snakes and everything. And in Vrindavan here, it was very austere. It was very austere for Westerners, to live this life. And, you can't go to the corner store and get yourself an ice cream cone or something. Some nice prasad even. So this struggle was there, but Prabhupada was so powerful, he just forced inspired us, actually, mobilized us, to do the impossible. I know devotees were preaching in the Middle East, and they get arrested and thrown in jail, and taking risks, took risks for the Lord, risked their lives. So that's devotee, risks his life, please Srila Prabhupada. And now we have, Vrindavan Dham, Mayapur Dham, Mumbai, so many temples now in India. I lived in India from 83 to 89 in New Delhi. And at that time, 83, I think there was like 15 temples in India. A couple in South India and then the main cities. And there was nothing in Kanpur, Lucknow, nothing there. It was just the Delhi, and we had a small building in Greater Kailash. M119 GK, so we preached from there. And then, gradually at that time we were working on permits and getting land and all this for Glory of India in the 80s, late 80s, and then started building. Well, it was a struggle. We had to go out every day and, door to door and convince people, become life members, and distribute books, and same in Mumbai and so on, in Gujarat. And, there was nice support in India, but it took time. So, probably forever grateful if we take some risks to spread his movement, spread the movement of Lord Chaitanya, and certainly we'll get his mercy. We'll get Krishna's mercy if we please the acharyas. We'll get his mercy, lots of mercy. Krishna Prem. That's what the only payment we want is how we can love the Lord Krishna, how we can become pure devotees. That's the only currency. If we join the movement and we have material ambitions, that will disqualify us from getting pure devotional service. When I was in Delhi, you had to clean out the corruption. People would join so they could get some money or something, and Krishna wouldn't be too happy. So we have to keep on the straight and narrow, and keep the goal in mind is pure devotional service. Keep ourselves pure, and avoid the pitfalls of Maya. She never sleeps. Maya never sleeps. And the longer we stay in the movement, in some ways it's more challenging. In the beginning everything's great, and you join with a bunch of people. Now I look around, where's everyone? This used to be like 500 Prabhupada disciples here in the 70s and late 70s and 80s. You go to Mayapur, you see all your friends. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Chicago. I'm from, St. Louis. Everyone knew each other. So it's not so easy to make the long route back home, back to Godhead. There's no loss, there's no diminution, like goes in your spiritual bank account, whatever you did for Srila Prabhupada. But it's a very great challenge. Prabhupada even said, he said in his class one time, he said, devotional service, people think it's so easy, just go chant Hare Krishna. He says, it's not at all easy. It's very difficult to remain a devotee, to be a devotee, and to, attain, pure love of God is very rarely achieved. That's what our goal is, our purpose, how to love Krishna, how to love the holy name, how to get a taste of the holy name. So many steps, and so many obstacles being offered all the time. The mind, the false ego, the mind, so many things, laziness. You're in the movement for 20, 30 years. Oh yeah, I've done it all. Take it easy now. cruise control. Like driving a car, I'll put it on cruise. No, we can't put it on cruise. We have to be always diligent. Watch out for the illusionary energy, the external energy of the Lord. She's just looking for an opportunity all the time. So Prabhupada was very concerned about his disciples. Very concerned when they left. He'd be very concerned, and he'd beg them, "Please, what did I do?" He would always take the blame. Gaur Govinda, he left the movement. He was in Hawaii. Govinda Dasi's husband, Gary, Gurusundar, and he left. And so he came to meet Prabhupada in 1976, years later, long here, living in Hawaii, heavenly planets. And Prabhupada said, "Why did you leave? What did I do wrong?" He took the whole blame. And he said, "You're my son. Why did you leave? Why did you leave me? You're my son." And Gurusundar was crying, and Prabhupada was like, "What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong?" That's how he felt. I must have made a mistake. But Maya's, especially live in a materially affluent country, is always a distraction. Especially if you grew up in doing nonsense for 20 years, and suddenly you're going to be a great brahmachari or something, great devotee. Not so easy. Not so easy at all. Conditioning is there, so we have to just see where we fit and continue on trying to please Srila Prabhupada. He said, "Whatever you do, don't leave me." That's what he said. Whatever you do, don't leave me. Don't leave. He said, don't L-E-A-V-E, just L-I-V-E. What he said to Brahmatirtha. Don't leave, just live. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for your association.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. And Sankirtan movement is destined to take over the world one day. We don't know when or how, but Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is God himself, and he's predicted it. So we just have to do our part and see what happens. And no one thought, but one person went to the West. No one thought, says, his something about the Sankirtan movement going all over the world. Bhakti-Vinod Thakur said something. Boom, it just happened like that. Boom. So that's how Lord Chaitanya works. Hare Krishna.